World War II brought sweeping transformation to the United States, but nowhere were its effects more dramatic than in Texas. Emerging from the hardships of the Great Depression, the state entered the 1940s still largely rural, agricultural, and economically struggling. By the war's end, however, Texas had been reshaped into a diversified, urban, industrial powerhouse. The foundations for this shift were already in place due to New Deal programs of the 1930s, which expanded federal influence, financed infrastructure, and stimulated public works. Yet it was wartime mobilization, unprecedented in scale, that accelerated these changes and pushed Texas permanently into the modern era. Conflict abroad had been building for years. Although the United States remained officially neutral after war erupted in Europe in 1939, it increasingly aided nations fighting Axis aggression. Under President Franklin D. Roosevelt's leadership, Congress passed the Selective Service Act in 1940, reinstating the draft, and in 1941 approved the Lend-Lease Act, which provided military equipment to Great Britain, China, and later the Soviet Union. Texans generally supported these measures. Every member of the state's congressional delegation, except two, backed the draft, and Senator Tom Connally played a crucial role in shepherding Lend-Lease legislation through the Senate. Many Texans recognized both the patriotic and economic benefits of military preparedness, as federal spending quickly flowed into the state. In 1941 alone, the government spent over $500 million on hardware and supplies in Texas, while expanding training facilities such as Fort Hood, designed to prepare armored units capable of matching German panzer divisions. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, an event that shocked the nation, ended any remaining ambiguity. Senator Connally introduced the declarations of war, Governor Coke Stevenson denounced the attack as cowardly, and Texans responded with overwhelming unity and resolve. With only 5% of the U.S. population, Texas furnished 7% of American military personnel, about 750,000 men and women. Some 22,022 Texans lost their lives, the highest proportional combat death toll since the Civil War. Texas military units served with distinction. The 36th Infantry Division, the famed Texas Division, or T-Patchers, fought from North Africa to Italy, suffering heavy casualties at Salerno and in the campaign for Rome before helping invade southern France. A detached battalion from this division, the 2nd Battalion, 131st Field Artillery, became the Lost Battalion after being captured in the Dutch East Indies and forced into brutal labor constructing the Burma-Thailand Railroad. The 90th Division, the Tough Hombres, landed at Utah Beach on D-Day and fought across France into Germany and Czechoslovakia. Individual Texans, too, played outsized roles. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz, who commanded the Pacific Fleet after Pearl Harbor, was born in the hill country town of Fredericksburg. Although he more identified with Kansas, Allied Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower was born in Denison and left the state when he was 2. Thus, Texas is one of just 2 states that produced 5-star officers. Texas was the birth state of other war heroes. For example, Doris Miller rose to fame while serving on the USS West Virginia. During the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, Miller carried injured sailors to safety and is officially credited with shooting down 1 enemy aircraft. Audie Murphy, the most decorated soldier in United States history, was born in Kingston, northeast of Dallas. Colonel Ovetta Culp Hobby, the wife of Governor William Hobby, organized and led the Women's Army Corps. Texas itself became the nation's largest training ground. Between 1941 and 1945, 1.2 million soldiers trained at its 15 major army installations, and 200,000 airmen trained at 40 airfields. Sweetwater's Avenger Field hosted the Women's Air Force Service Pilots, WASPs, who ferried aircraft and performed dangerous flight duties without military status or benefits until belated recognition in 1977. Meanwhile, the state housed more than 50,000 Axis prisoners of war in 21 permanent camps, where German captives worked on farms and in skilled trades under generally humane conditions. While Texans fought abroad, dramatic change unfolded at home. War demanded sacrifice, and rationing became part of daily life as families used government-issued coupons to manage purchases of sugar, meat, coffee, shoes, rubber, and gasoline. Victory gardens flourished, scrap drives mobilized communities, and reduced speed limits encouraged the use of buses and trains whose ridership soared. Farmers, aided by mechanization and federal loans, shifted from cotton to food crops and livestock, especially in East Texas, where cattle production surged. Labor shortages drove reliance on women and, in some regions, undocumented Mexican laborers, especially after Texas refused to participate in the Bracero program. Oil, long central to Texas's economy, grew more complex during the war. Though demand rose once the U.S. entered the conflict, German submarine attacks in the Gulf hindered tanker shipments. In response, the federal government built two massive pipelines, the Big Inch and the Little Big Inch, to move crude and refined petroleum safely to the East Coast. This innovation revitalized the industry despite shortages of trained workers and steel. Yet the greatest wartime economic surge came from manufacturing. Along the Gulf Coast, the petrochemical industry became the largest in the world, producing synthetic rubber and aviation fuel. Steel mills opened in Houston and Dangerfield. The world's largest tin smelter began production in Texas City, and shipyards in Beaumont, Port Arthur, Houston, Galveston, and Corpus Christi turned out naval vessels. Aircraft plants in Garland, Grand Prairie, and Fort Worth rivaled the giant factories of Detroit. Munitions plants, including the Lone Star Army ammunition plant near Texarkana, supplied shells, bombs, and small-caliber ammunition. Between 1939 and 1944, manufacturing output in Texas jumped from $453 million to $1.9 billion, transforming the state into a diversified industrial hub. Labor shortages during this boom empowered unions, which organized most major wartime industries by 1945. Women entered jobs previously reserved for men, symbolized by the cultural icon Rosie the Riveter, and although many were expected to leave these positions after the war, their contributions left a permanent imprint. African American workers, whose numbers in industry nearly doubled during the war, still faced discrimination, as did Mexican Americans, who were largely confined to lower-wage, unskilled positions. Wartime prosperity fueled massive urbanization. Texas's population surged by more than 1.2 million during the 1940s, reaching 7.7 million by 1950. Though many black Texans left for California and the North, their departure was offset by rising Mexican-American migration. By 1950, the state's African-American population had declined proportionally to 13%, while Mexican-Americans approached 1 million residents. Meanwhile, Texas crossed the threshold into becoming a predominantly urban state. The urban population rose from 45 to 60%, the largest increase in its history. Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Fort Worth, Corpus Christi, Austin, and El Paso all grew dramatically, with Corpus Christi nearly doubling in size. Politically, the war years brought both stability and mounting tension. Governor Coke Stevenson, calculating Coke, managed budgets conservatively, eliminated Depression-era debt, expanded highways and school funding, and maintained high approval ratings. Yet challenges mounted as conservatives in the state's Democratic Party clashed with New Deal liberals. The 1942 Senate race between former Governor James Allred and Senator W. Lee Pappy O'Daniel showcased rising anti-labor and anti-communist rhetoric. By 1944, conservatives broke away entirely, forming the Texas Regulars to protest Roosevelt's fourth term, federal labor protections, and Supreme Court decisions such as Smith v. Allwright, which struck down the white primary and expanded black political participation. Though the Regulars failed to dent Roosevelt's overwhelming popularity, their revolt marked the beginning of decades of partisan realignment in Texas. Higher education also became a battleground. Regents aligned with conservative forces dismissed liberal professors, challenged tenure, and banned materials they deemed radical. When University of Texas President Homer Price Rainey publicly protested these infringements on academic freedom, he was fired in 1944, sparking statewide controversy and influencing post-war political debates. Civil rights pressures intensified as well. Jim Crow segregation remained entrenched across Texas, and racial violence, including the 1942 lynching of Willie Vinson and the 1943 Beaumont riot, exposed deep injustices. Black veterans returned determined to claim equal rights, forming the backbone of post-war activism. Mexican-American veterans likewise organized, founding the American GI Forum in 1948 to challenge discrimination. Women, whose wartime roles broadened expectations, increasingly demanded legal and civic equality. By 1945, Texas had been remade. Wartime migration brought roughly 450,000 new residents, while returning veterans, more than 600,000 of them, expected expanded freedoms and opportunities. Oil overtook cotton and cattle as the state's leading economic force, but agriculture diversified, industry expanded, and modern infrastructure, from pipelines to highways to rural electrification, connected the farthest reaches of the state. Texas, once overwhelmingly rural, stood on the cusp of a new era, more urban, industrial, politically contested, and socially dynamic than ever before. The war had unsettled old patterns, forged new opportunities, and permanently transformed the state's identity, economy, and place within the nation.